is Saturday, May the 27th, 2022, and we are done with students at school. Year 27 is in the books, and I'm feeling really good. I had an amazing last week, and that's thanks to my really understanding co-workers who allowed me to go off with 3 different groups of students while they stayed back and manned the fort. Super grateful to my team. They're amazing people. I tested them this week, and they didn't complain, and they just took my kids that were left and ran with it, and I'm like so incredibly grateful to have such amazing people that I work with. So today, a lot has happened this last week. Haven't been vlogging much. Well, I've been taking lots of pictures and lots of video clips, but I'm going to show you 3 field trips that I took my students on this week, but of course I'm not going to be able to show students. I didn't get like a blanket permission to put all of the students in my video, so, and since school is out, I'm not really going to call and bother everyone, but I will show you what I can of the field trips in case you are looking at field trips maybe for next year, or in case you're interested in opportunities for learning experiences in Eastern North Carolina. That would be good for yourself on a vacation with your own family members and your own children. But I took 3 different field trips this week. They were all like based on life sciences, so I will talk to you about that. But I'm going to my classroom today because I'm going to work on packing. Last weekend, Joe came home from his praxis and he was upset because it was a very difficult version of the test that he took. It was his 2nd time taking the test. The high school science test is no joke, guys. I don't know that I could pass it. I haven't tried. Not really a fan of teaching high school, so I haven't even added that to my certifications. I guess he had the really tough version the 2nd time around. So he's studying right now. Last weekend when he came home, I was planning on spending more time at school, but he just kind of needed to hang out and relax and have someone to kind of like, I don't want to say unload, but like vent to about his frustrations. So I changed my plans up and stayed with him, and we swam around in the pool and hung out outside, and you know, went to dinner and did some fun things and just tried to like de-stress from that whole experience. So that's the plan right now. So come along with me and let's have a great day hanging out together in my classroom. Really love living in Hyde County. It's just such a beautiful like nature reserve, and we have all of these Arctic swans that come here and migrate here in the winter time because there's a lot of preserve. And I have one of those little clip things on my dash, so I just have this propped up. Staying up very well. Okay. So anyway, it's just a really beautiful place. A lot of people come here for vacationing in the cooler months for hunting, deer and bear and everything, and ducks. It's a great like duck hunting area. So yeah, really pretty. Right now the bear are super active, and so we have to watch out because we see them everywhere. I remember the first time that I ever came out here for my initial interview back in 2009. We went down this road it's like the main road in and the main road out. It's called, people call it the Stumpy Point Road because it goes past this little community called Stumpy Point. But it's Highway 264, and we were just driving down this road, and lo and behold, there right in front of us was a mother bear and her 3 little cubs just running behind her, and she stopped in the middle of the road and she stood up and she like looked at us and she waited for her cubs to run across, and then she followed them. It was really cool. And I was like, this place is awesome. Like, when you think of coming to Eastern North Carolina, like you probably think of like the Outer Banks. If you're familiar with the area, you think of beaches. We have beautiful beaches, and part of the reason is because, you know, it's more remote. We haven't had like this big huge buildup of all these like really fancy touristy places. It's more of like a protected area, so our beaches are really clean and really beautiful because of that, because we don't get as much, I mean, we get a lot of traffic for us, but it's not like going to like Virginia Beach or, you know, like Myrtle Beach or Daytona or something like that. It's like much more like wild. I didn't realize like what Eastern North Carolina was really like, and there's a big diversity of like areas, what the different like regions are like as far as, you know, your environment around you. So it's really a pretty interesting place, because you can go from being at the beach to being like out in the country in the cornfields and wheat fields in like under an hour, and it's just really cool. We have like Alright, so I am in my classroom, as you can tell, working on putting some stuff away, but let me go ahead and talk to you really quick about these 3 field trip opportunities that you have if you teach in Eastern North Carolina or anywhere in the state and you'd like to travel. So Monday, I took the 6th graders to the Great Dismal Swamp State Park. This was an awesome field trip. I did not realize before going here how many things there were. This is a little state park that is right off of a rest stop, and you can actually go there and completely miss all the wonderful things that they have. The Dismal Swamp State Park allows a unique wilderness experience in a landscape that has been witness to American Indian hunting parties, exploration by George Washington, and the story of the Underground Railroad. The park features 20 miles of trails beyond a 2,000-foot boardwalk that puts visitors in the midst of the Great Dismal Swamp. Birding and viewing abundant wildlife are favorite activities there. Mountain biking on the trails and kayaking the adjacent Dismal Swamp Canal are both encouraged. Visitors may bring their own equipment or rent at the park. Regular interpretive programs about the wetlands, ecology, and history of the famed swamp complement museum-quality exhibits in the Visitor Center. Ranger Katie was the person who showed us around, and we really enjoyed our visit there. Students enjoyed, first of all, a nature hike. We walked through the canal area. The students got to see how the drawbridge worked to allow boats to go through the canal, and there were several boats that were passing through on the day that we were there, so they actually got to witness that in action. And then as we went across the bridge, we went inside the visitor center, and there was all kinds of taxidermy of the local wildlife. So Ranger Katie showed us around the visitor center. We read the signs about the different types of animals that are in the ecosystem there. She talked a little bit about relationships among the different, the predator and prey relationships there, and also the types of plants and animals that are just native to that area. The really cool thing for 6th grade was that there's a lot about like the food chains in the area, and also they have a lot to do with the soil formation, because that's a peat soil, and they're right in the very center of the nature center. There's a big column. It's like a, what would you call it, a core sample of the soil layers. And so the students were learning about soil formation in 6th grade science this year, and we saw this diagram of the soil horizons in our textbook, but it was really cool to actually see a real core sample inside a plastic display case, so the students could look at the different layers and understand peat and how that forms. So she did a little talk on that. She discussed the wildfires and what it's like when you have a fire in an area that is a highly peat soil. and she talked about the changes that had happened in the area over the years due to the fires, and how the animals had left and then some of them had come back, and that affected the balance of the food chain and the food web in the area. So we went through that. We went into this little room that was like an educational room, and she showed us the guaranteed wildlife sightings, which is their taxidermy collection. And she talked about all the different animals that, you know, feed on one another. And then she talked to us about the hike that we were about to take and gave us some pointers on how to stay safe and how to make sure that we saw the most wildlife, which basically the students have to be quiet, because the quieter they are, the more they're going to see. Unfortunately, with 6th graders, it's pretty difficult when they're excited about a field trip to keep them quiet. So we did see some wildlife. We saw tracks of wildlife as well. We saw bear and bobcat tracks. We saw wild turkey. We saw fawn. But a lot of the things that we had an opportunity to see were kind of hiding in the woods that day due to the fact that we were just an excited bunch of students. However, the students were really good. They did see a ton of caterpillars, and they were very excited about the caterpillars. They were all picking them up, and of course we had to make sure that they put them all back in their habitat. Then as we went on the hike a little further, she showed us some of the different flora and fauna that are in the area, and she talked about which animals fed on different types of producers. And then we got to do something really fun, which was to get on their wagons, and she took us on a little wagon ride a little bit further so that we could get further into the trails. We actually only saw a few miles of the trails. The trails are really extensive there. If we actually went through everything, there were 20 miles of trails, and you know, we maybe only saw a quarter of a mile of trail in the time that we were there. But then we saw a couple miles when we went on the wagon. So as we got further out, she was able to talk to us about the swamp and how it had benefited the early settlers. She discussed George Washington's explorations and the timber business that he worked on there. And then she showed us an example of original canal boats and discussed how the canal had been used over the years to move goods from place to place before we had a more extensive road system, and before we had, you know, like trains and different ways of getting around. She talked a little bit about the moonshine that used to be a big business in that area, and we got to see a replica of a distillery that was back in the woods there. Students just really had a lot of fun. They got to see a lot of things that we've been talking about in our curriculum right there in live action, which makes it so much more real. And then as a preview to what they're learning in 7th grade, we did a little water sampling. She had talked about the tannins that were in the water that made it have that brown color, and how the water was actually very clean. So we took a water sample and we brought it back to their education room, and she showed us this amazing microscope that they have that is connected to a TV. So we could look in there and see the different types of living organisms on a microscopic level that were in our water sample. She also showed us some other things like honeycomb and some different, you know, like butterfly, I think, or fly, dragonfly wings underneath that microscope. Students were just captivated by her explanation. She did a great job of bringing it down to their level, and they just really came away with a lot of hands-on knowledge that we definitely could not have gotten in the regular classroom. All right, moving on to our second field trip, that was with our 7th grade. 7th grade does a lot of physics, like forces in motion, and so we decided to go to the Wright brothers. We had talked a little bit about the Wright brothers during our study on Newton's laws, and we discussed the factors that help keep an airplane up in the air. But on our visit to the Wright Brothers National Memorial, we were able to experience the place where the two brothers, Orville and Wilbur Wright, from Dayton, Ohio, experimented with flight in the early 1900s. They finally succeeded on a cold winter day with the world's first controlled, sustained-powered, heavier-than-air flight. Exploring the grounds gave us an opportunity to see reproductions of the brothers' 1903 camp buildings stand at the place where Wilbur and Orville Wright first took to the air in their 1903 Wright Flyer and landed. And we got to climb the big Kill Devil Hill to see the nation's monument commemorating the brothers' historic achievement. We also took an interpretive program on the brothers and examined the replica of the 1903 Flyer. So the Wright brothers has several service rangers that are there. They're very knowledgeable. We did take in the talk by the one ranger that was there that day. She talked about a lot about growth mindset, which I hadn't realized was going to be part of the discussion, which it actually was amazing because growth mindset is a concept that we have really worked on with our students over the last several years to improve their learning and their stamina and persistence in learning in the classroom. So she related the consistent, like the constant failures and going back to the drawing board and teamwork that the Wright brothers engaged in with other scientists that have been studying the same like concepts to build their understanding of how flight worked and to re-engineer and re-engineer and re-engineer their Wright Flyer until it finally took off and went on the first flight that we all know. So we were able to actually do a little lesson while we were there that day. The nice thing about taking students to the Wright Brothers National Memorial is that there's a lot of resources available online that you can do pre and post visit. And I actually took one of their lessons that can be done while you're there in person. And I brought some tape measures in for the students, some 25-foot tape measures. We went to where the stones were that marked the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth trials. And we measured the distance from the starting point until each of these stones using the tape measure. Then we took the statistics that were given to us on the Wright brothers flights, and we did a little rate times time equals distance work. We had the students run to each of the markers in groups and then timed the amount of time that it took the airplane to get there. So we could see how when the students first started off on the first and second trial, they were running as fast as the airplane was flying. But after the Wright brothers went back to the drawing board and re-engineered their design for the Wright Flyer, the flyer went further and faster, and so they were able to see that they had made those improvements, and so now the airplane was actually traveling faster than they could run. So it was just a great way to show students how these different concepts worked in person, and I think they really enjoyed learning about the history. One thing I would say is that when you go, I'm hoping that it will be at a time when they're actually showing the movie. They have a little like video in a room that you can sometimes see that explains the life of the Wright brothers. Our ranger did an excellent job of kind of like covering all of that, but if she hadn't have done such a thorough job, I think that some of our students would not have realized the lengths that the Wright brothers had to go to actually make that flight happen. So the movie is nice because it shows pictures of the actual event, the actual flights, the trials, and it shows their bicycle shop in Dayton, Ohio, where they did a lot of the engineering of their, the scientific work. But at the time that we went, they had actually closed down the movies and at that time they weren't showing any because of COVID. So hopefully when you get an opportunity to visit, they will have reopened that because it is a really good video. It's about 15 minutes, I think, and it's definitely worth sitting and listening to. However, if you can't, make sure that you go to the Ranger Talk because their rangers, like I said, are very knowledgeable, very helpful, and our students learned a lot. And then last but certainly not least, we went with the 8th graders to Picosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge, which is really just right down the road from our school, about 30 miles to 40 miles away. Picosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge is in Columbia, North Carolina. We visited with Ranger Cat. She was amazing, and the really cool thing was that our students had studied symbiotic relationships among animals in a habitat, and that was actually her master's, what she focused her master's work in. So we had the perfect match for what our students needed to learn. Ranger Cat met us at the front, and we went through and did the little boardwalk walk. Picosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge conserves a rare type of wetland habitat known as Picosin, derived from a Native American word meaning swamp on a hill. The refuge encompasses vast acres of natural wetlands, including the unique southeastern Picosin peat wetlands, open water on Pungo and New Lakes, upland pine forests, and managed moist soil and agricultural units that provide high-energy food for waterfowl. More than 100,000 ducks, geese, and swans congregate on the refuge in the winter, and the refuge supports one of the densest populations of black bear ever reported.
Look at that puppy. Oh, he's camera shy.
The refuge is the site of one of the country's largest wetland restoration projects, restoring natural hydrology to the Picosin peatlands. So she talked about all of this. We walked through the nature center, read all the signs about the different animals and plants in the area. In that respect, it was very similar to the Great Dismal Swamp tour, but we got actually one added benefit that we weren't even planning on. They had a master botanist who was there that day. He just happened to be at the center because they were doing like a convention of biologists from the wildlife, I guess the refuges all over the United States. So they had people there that were studying like on a professional level under this master botanist. And he was a retired wildlife officer. And so the person who led us around, Kat, Ranger Cat, she had actually done her internship in college under this person. And then he came back every so often to give a talk to these biologists who had come from different areas. So it was we were so lucky that we got to listen to him. He took us around to through the boardwalk, showed us all the plant life, and discussed how the settlers might have used different types of plants in their settlement of the area. So that was an amazing experience. He talked to us about, for example, bayberry, which was a waxy type of like plant, the seed of the bayberry plant. It has like a film or a coating on it. They would melt that down, and it had a particular scent, and they would add that to their candles when they made candles so that they had scented candles. Who knew that even the colonists had scented candles all the way back then? So we got to enjoy a lot of the history of the area, as well as learning about the plants and the animals and the food chain. And then when we came back, the most fascinating thing happened of all. Ranger Cat, she actually is in charge of taking care of the red wolves at that station. And the red wolves have been picked specifically for reintroduction into the population after being endangered of going extinct. They have been reintroduced, so a small population of them was placed in the Picosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge. They identified it as a great place because of the wildlife that lives there, naturally supports that population, and it's one of the healthiest places for them to live as they repopulate. I have wanted to see these red wolves in person for such a long time, and they're very skittish animals, so they don't come around humans very easily or very often. But she actually knew that there were 2 of them in captivity in the Red Wolf Center. So she took us and opened the Red Wolf Center for us, which has been closed to the public for several years now. And before that, they had it closed for a very long time due to the fact that they had dwindling numbers of the red wolves. So we actually were some of the first people in a very, very long time to see these red wolves in the impoundment. She took us in, closed the gate behind us, and then there were bleachers there that we could stand on, and we were able to look in and see the wolves running around. It was so cool.
So we have 2 wolves in here, and like I said, they may not come around, but
Yeah, no. There's one
already. There's one. So yep, that's our female. She's about 8 years old. She likes to run around. She's probably the most bold out of the both of them. I'm like feeling like, I'm like checking everybody. I'm like checking myself, like, all right. Fun fact about tick bites: if you're going to get any kind of disease from them, it takes 24 hours of them being lashed onto your body. So definitely make sure to check yourself.
Thanks for making us feel better.
As a field biologist that has already had 4 tick bites this season, we're good.
So
no.
She talked about their ages and how they ended up in there. It was actually kind of a old folks home for red wolves, because those particular red wolves that are being kept in captivity, they are not young enough and healthy enough to be reintroduced into the wild. So they just keep them there and feed them, and they're trying to, establish a bond between the trainer, the person who takes care of them all the time and feeds them. But, red wolves are very afraid of humans, and so far they've not established like a play relationship where they'll come to the human who comes to feed them. But it was really interesting to see, and I was so excited. It made my science teacher heart happy. And then at the end, we added a little bit of a surprise, a twist that was not on our original itinerary, but because the Wildlife Refuge works directly with Picosin Arts Gallery. They have several buildings just across the road, and you can take the boardwalk safely to get over there. They do programs with them in the summertime, so they have like summer camps, and both the Arts Gallery and the Wildlife Refuge will have summer camps. And as a result, they've decided to merge their efforts and work together. So they have created kind of like a natural wildlife art series that they do together, and the wildlife ranger will come over to the Picosin Arts Gallery and work directly with the artists in charge of that, of running those classes, and students can come and learn over the summer, elementary all the way up through high school. They break them into 2 separate groups depending on the age, and do different projects with them that are geared towards like the conservation efforts and the protection efforts of our local wildlife populations. So we went over there, and Kat introduced us to Addison, who gave us a tour of their facility, and we walked through their buildings. He showed us all the many types of equipment that they have, how they have the pottery area, they have the jewelry making area, they have like a sheet metal pressing area, and areas where they can work on fine art like jewelry, and then also areas where they paint things, and the kiln areas, and then they have a woodworking section. So we went through that. And Columbia High School actually does some of their CTE courses in that area. And then really neat that I had no idea we were going to get to see was the digital art area. So they have things like screen presses and what I want to say laser cutting, where they can make stickers out of artistic designs that are scanned into the computer and like put them on as like decals. So you can transfer something to a t-shirt, or you can put a decal on like a window or whatever you want to do. You can make signs with them. And they also have 3D printing. So some of our students were super interested in that, and we got to see someone working on a project. He was creating some 3D art to actually become part of some jewelry that he was making. But there are lots of applications for that, and some of our students who are really interested in the engineering aspects of science got their to see their heart's content of that type of equipment. And the really cool thing about all of this is that these are really hidden treasures for us, because we are right down the road, just 30 miles or so away, and students can come over the summer, they can take classes, they can go to the wildlife refuge, take walks. There are a lot of opportunities. So I think from now on, if we do this field trip again, we're going to call it the Hidden Treasures Field Trip, because it really is like all these things that are at our fingertips, that we go by them every day and we don't even realize they're there. I did not know that the Red Wolf Center, where they're keeping the live red wolves in captivity, was where it is. It's very close to our dump, where we take our trash on a regular basis, and we just drive by there, and we don't even notice that it's there. These were 3 great field trips that I really enjoyed taking my students on. I felt like they supplemented our curriculum very well in the state of North Carolina, but they're applicable to science, life science curriculums in many states for middle and even elementary students. Even high school students could benefit from them. So if you're interested, I will put the contact information for all 3 of these places below in the description box. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope it gives you some inspiration for your own field experience, field trips with your students. As always, don't forget to work hard, be kind, and amazing things will eventually happen.